Hi everybody, Coach Stacy Lynn here. I want to welcome you to this video and thank those of you who have left comments, polite comments. I really appreciate those insulting comments. Say a lot about you who are the ones leaving insulting comments, just so you know. So today I want to share with you a few thoughts about some of the breaking news stories, and I want to point out a couple of things that maybe you haven't thought of. Okay, maybe you have, I don't know. If you have, then let me know. Um, I am coming at looking at these news stories from the perspective of somebody who's been trained as a therapist, but also as somebody who coaches now. I don't do therapy now, but I've been in the media for over 20 years, and I've noticed a couple of very interesting things about how these stories are covered, even in Christian media. So, one of the breaking news stories this week was that Pastor Robert Morris has been indicted on child sex charges. Apparently, it took over 43 years for Cindy Clemshire, his victim, to get justice. Okay. So now I want to share with you, I'm going to share with you part of a video from Christian media, and I want to point out a couple of things to you. First of all, this is from CBN News, so the Christian Broadcasting Network. Second of all, this is Billy Hollowell, who is a pretty well-known journalist. I've actually met Billy in person at the National Religious Broadcasters many years ago. Nice guy. But I want you to know how this is being framed, okay? Now, admittedly, this was done in June of last year, but let's hear it. Let's listen to a few minutes of Billy.
The scandal involving Robert Morris continues to reverberate throughout Christian circles. The Gateway Church founder resigned amid allegations he molested a 12-year-old girl in the 1980s. His departure came 2 days after issuing a statement admitting to, quote, inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady. Morris added that he had confessed, repented, stepped out of ministry to receive counseling, and has since walked in purity. Today, we bring you our conversation with his accuser, Cindy Clemshire. Cindy, I know the last few weeks, the last 2 weeks in particular, have been.
Okay, I'm not gonna play this part. I want to point out to you that Cindy is being referred to as the accuser. Okay? Now, why is this important, people? Why is this important? Because I'm going to tell you something. Because victims of these crimes are being labeled as accusers as opposed to victims. You see the difference? So, what's interesting here is that Cindy's gotten justice, thank God, right? Thank God. All right. Also, this week, want to let you know Julie Roys and Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson did interviews. Julie did hers first, and then Laura Lynn did a live one with Jeanette Hawkins, who is the director of marketing for Daystar, right? The former director of marketing for Daystar. Now, what's interesting is I watched both of these interviews. One was 2 hours, the other one was, I think, about an hour and a half. So 3.5 hours I sat there, and not all at once, but I did sit there. And I watched Julie's interview and I watched Laura Lynn's interview with Jeanette Hawkins, the former director of marketing for Daystar, who was the one who was one of the few people who actually exposed Marcus Lamb's adulterous affair on his wife, okay? Now, what was interesting to me was Dr. Phil covered it. Good Morning America did cover it. And of course, there were lawsuits and other things. But what's amazing to me is how Daystar, Dr. Phil, the Kendalls, all these people um, negated the actual real victim, which was Jeanette Hawkins. And I have to point this out. First of all, If you haven't seen these interviews, you need to go and check them out because this interview, both of these interviews were extremely revealing about how narcissistic, spiritually abusive people work. You have an evil system that literally gaslit and blamed the victim. And and this unfortunately is kind of the norm, unfortunately. But I see one of the things that I'm encouraged by is that there are now people besides me who's been doing this for a long time. My shows were all banned by YouTube, but there are now people out there who have bigger platforms who are actually able now to get the message out. And I have to tell you that there is nobody more happy, well, maybe Jeanette is, than me to see people, the victims, the survivors of abuse, the victims, the survivors of abuse getting their voice heard. Because I'm going to tell you something. One of the things as a victim of abuse that you need in order to heal from your abuse is you need to be validated, seen, and heard. And what happens in most of these cases, and it's so subtle, especially in media, because in media, that line, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So if it bleeds, it leads, but hey, if there's something good happening, forget that. Let's bury it on the bottom of, the 15th page of the newspaper because nobody really cares about the good news. And believe me, I tried to do a Good News Monday show for a very long time, and nobody wanted to tune into it because it was good news. Well, when a survivor of horrific abuse gets heard, that offers tremendous healing to the soul and the heart and the mind of that person. I know this experientially. And here's the other thing. You don't necessarily need a gazillion people to hear your story. In some cases, all you need is one or two, right? And so I'm very thankful that Jeanette and Cindy, the survivors of these narcissistically abusive spiritual predators, are finally getting heard and validated for the abuse that they went through. But here's the thing, and this is the thing I want to point out. The thing is that who's going to get the headline more than anybody? It's always the perpetrator. In other words, it's Satan's person. It's always the perpetrator. Whenever anybody is, the victim of a killer, just like, as an example, who's remembered? It's the killer, right? The name of the killer. 9/11, who's remembered? It's not all the people that died, it's the attack that we had, from whoever you want to believe actually attacked us. Um, So, my encouragement here is if you're a survivor, if you've survived abuse, right, and you have been the brave one, you've come forward not to quote accuse, but to say, hey, I've been a victim of a crime here, because it is, thus Robert getting indicted, just saying, uh, then, the thing is that support system needs to grow and grow and grow. And it unfortunately, it's not in the church. Unfortunately, so many survivors of abuse in the church, they haven't gotten support in the church. And so I just want to ask all of you, if you're following these stories and you see the good news there, offer up a prayer of thanks to the Lord for the fact that the victims' voices got heard, those who survived the abuse. Going back to, the whole Daystar scandal with Jonathan and Susie and their little girl who's been the victim of a predator, right? Now, all of this whole thing has been about is holding the predator abuser accountable. Just like when I made my video a couple days ago, Julie Royce has also made numerous videos about John MacArthur. John MacArthur is an abusive predator pastor. And I will say predator because he knew exactly what was going on And even after he was confronted with the facts from somebody on his own board who was an attorney, he still didn't want to do what was right. That's a predator. That's what Satan does, people. That's not what godly people do. Godly people defend the poor, defend the widow, defend the abused, right? And even our Lord Jesus said that it would be better for a millstone to be hung around somebody's neck than to harm one of his children. So this week, I'm happy that Cindy Clemshire, who wasn't the accuser, she was the victim of Robert Morris, and Jeanette Hawkins are finally getting their voices and exposing the manipulative, evil, wicked system that they've been a part of. And mark my words, there are more people who've been in these systems that are toxic. And so if you didn't see my previous two videos, go back and watch those where I list at least 6 things that you can look at in a toxic system. There's way more than that. I'm going to probably be doing more videos on that in the future, but let me know what you think in the comments if you don't mind. And if you're a survivor of abuse from somebody, I want you to know that to me, your voice matters, your story matters, your name matters more than those who hurt you. And I think it's about time that instead of magnifying and glorifying the predators all over the place, we need to uplift the survivors of the predators and give them a little bit more respect than we often get as people who've been abused.